Hello. Today we will explain the movie Central Intelligence. There may be spoilers in this video. Enjoy and subscribe. 1996, Central High School student Robbie Wyerdicht is in the storage space, shower moving and lip matching up to En Vogue's My Lovin'. A gathering of secondary school menaces drove by Trevor Olson come in and mock Robbie since he is overweight and dorky. In the interim, a school gathering happens with the entire senior class regarding its most famous understudy Calvin, the brilliant fly joiner. Trevor and his hooligans convey Robbie into the rec center and slide him across the floor butt-stripped. Everybody snickers at Robbie, aside from Calvin, who gives him his coat to cover himself up. Robbie runs out of the exercise center, totally embarrassed. After 20 years, Calvin works a bookkeeping position that he despises. His previous collaborator just got advanced above him. Calvin is hitched to his secondary school darling Maggie, however their marriage hasn't been working out in a good way lately. Also, their secondary school gathering is coming up, and Calvin fears that he's crested in secondary school and his life has recently gone downhill. At work, Calvin declines a Facebook greeting to the get-together. Following, he gets a companion demand from somebody named Bob Stone. Following that, he gets a dubious call, however it ends up being Maggie. Bob Stone then, at that point, begins informing Calvin to welcome him out for a beverage. He asserts he is truly Robbie Wyerdicht. Calvin reluctantly acknowledges the welcome. Calvin strolls to the bar and is shocked to find that Robbie has totally changed into a strong person. The two have beverages and get up to speed. As Bob leaves briefly, a man strolls by and takes Bob's seat. Calvin advises the person to give it back, however the person's companions stand up menacingly. Sway returns and advises them to apologize for disregarding Calvin. One of the hooligans ends up having a firearm. Bob makes his effort and essentially says, "I could do without menaces," prior to kicking every one of their butts in under 10 seconds. Calvin and Bob leave the bar, with Calvin energized over what he recently saw. They head over to their old secondary school for a walk around a world of fond memories. All they see a prize case with Calvin's achievements, alongside an image of a young lady named Darla McGuckian, whom Bob really liked and was noted for having two lethargic eyes. Bob strolls by the young men's storage space and is taken back to the most terrible day of his life. Calvin solaces him and pulls him away from that point. The two then, at that point, stroll back to Calvin's home. Before they head out in different directions, Bob specifies requiring Calvin's assistance with respect to something in Calvin's profession. Weave goes into his home to utilize the PC. They go over documents including satellite codes and an offering war. Bob spills brew on Calvin's PC before they can see more. He then, at that point, requests to rest over. Calvin hesitantly permits him to do as such. Toward the beginning of the day, a gathering of CIA specialists drove by Pamela Harris appear at Calvin's entryway searching for Bob. Calvin expresses he's on the sofa, and the specialists head in. Bob is mysteriously gone. Harris clears up for Calvin that Weave is believed for homicide and intrigue should commit injustice. The specialists follow Calvin to work in the event that he connects with Bob. Sufficiently sure, Bob calls Calvin and says he is someplace in the structure. Harris drives the specialists to that particular floor, however Bob is truly concealing in Calvin's office. Bob uncovers he is in the CIA and that individuals that need the satellite codes will kill for them. Bob requires a Uber to get them, which will be in a short time. He times his best courses of action as needs be. Bob takes Calvin's tie and folds it over the sprinkler on the roof. He then, at that point, lights it ablaze before Calvin runs outside to make everybody aware of Bob's presence. The specialists run up and begin taking shots at Bob, yet the man easily hits back and weakens a large portion of the specialists. He and Calvin are then cornered by Harris and different specialists. At the right second, the sprinklers go off, allowing Bob the opportunity to wheel Calvin away in a mail truck and burst through a window. They land on the organization's inflatables and ride away in the Uber. Bob takes Calvin to his protected spot to eliminate the GPS from the vehicle. Bob enlightens Calvin concerning how he's been set up, since his accomplice Phil was caught in a lift and was left to be exploded, which has been outlined for. He accepts somebody with the code name of Black Badger is searching out the satellite codes for an evil reason, and he wants Calvin's assistance since he's the main individual Bob trusts. A professional killer appears on his bike. Bob thumps the person off, passing on Calvin to take the cruiser and trench Bob. He calls Maggie and tells her to not return home. As he leaves, Harris pulls up in a van and causes Calvin to get in. She says Bob is risky and flips his story around to say that it was he that sold out Phil and organized his homicide. She gives Calvin a gadget to use to make them aware of Bob's whereabouts. Calvin meets Maggie at the workplace of a marriage mentor named Dr. Dan, who is truly Bob. They have a meeting wherein Calvin is made to seem to be a miscreant who is harming his and Maggie's relationship. After Maggie leaves, Calvin compromises Bob with calling Harris. Bob realizes he wouldn't do that. Both of them go to the workplace of somebody that can help them out on their central goal. Sadly for Bob, this individual is Trevor Olson. After Trevor trusts that Bob will beat him senseless as well, however Sway freezes up and chooses to leave. As they leave the workplace, Calvin gets a call from Harris saying that he wants to convey Bob to them, or something will happen to Maggie. Calvin then meets Bob outside. Bob says Calvin was consistently his just friend, which makes it harder on the two of them when the specialists show up and secure them. Bob and Calvin are kept at the CIA Central Command. The specialists begin to torment Bob to get data out of him by breaking one of his fingers. Loaded up with lament, Calvin retaliates and safeguards Weave, leaving different specialists in binds. Calvin apologizes to Bob for what he did, concluding he actually needs to help him. Bob excuses him and continues to give him a high five, just to see his wrecked finger. He pops it once again into the right spot. Bob and Calvin become familiar with the area of where the miscreants need to purchase the satellite codes. They fly a plane to the spot, however Bob says the plane has run out of juice. They head in for an accident arrival. Calvin communicates his lament of not being a dad. Bob then, at that point, pulls the plane back up, having faked the circumstance to get Calvin to communicate his apprehensions under intense pressure. Bob heads into the purchase alone, telling Calvin, "I'll see you on the opposite side," which is exactly the same thing he told Phil before his demise. Calvin then spots Harris appearing at the area, driving him to believe she's Black Badger. Calvin enters the purchase spot to find Bob making the arrangement with the purchaser, Thomas Kretschmann. Bob takes shots at Calvin, however he simply brushes his neck. The genuine Black Badger arises to make a deal. It's Phil, guaranteeing he has the genuine satellite codes. He and Bound squabble about who the genuine Dark Badger is, and Phil affronts 16 Candles and Street House, Bob's #1 motion pictures. Harris and her representatives show up and begin taking shots at the purchaser and his thugs, leaving Calvin, Bob, and Phil to run. Calvin winds up swiping the codes. The three all end up over a little scaffold. Calvin has a weapon in his grasp, and he points it at both Bob and Phil. He shoots Bob in the leg, yet he holds the firearm on Phil. Phil says he faked his own demise and set Weave up essentially in light of the fact that he was simply irritated with Bob as his accomplice, continuously being a numbskull and happening about how Calvin was his legend. Before Phil can kill Calvin, Bob tears out Phil's throat, very much like Street House, and drives him into the stream. Bob apologizes to Calvin for shooting him, saying he expected to make it look persuading. The folks hand over the codes to Harris, who says thanks to them for their assistance. With Bob's name cleared, Harris has them taken to the gathering in a chopper. The two show up and meet Maggie. Calvin vows to make things work between them. The three enter the gathering. Another prom lord is reported, and it's Bob. Calvin tells Maggie he hacked into the school's democratic framework and offered him the honor. Trevor and his mates go up to ridicule Bob, however he will not have any of it, and he gives Trevor a punch that he's had coming for a long time. Bob goes in front of an audience and gives a discourse expressing that he's come to acknowledge what his identity is and recognizing Calvin as his companion. He then, at that point, continues to take his garments off, as of now not embarrassed about himself. The others cheer him on. Bob is then drawn nearer by Darla McGuckian. He removes her glasses, guaranteeing she is wonderful as she is. They then, at that point, kiss. Bob and Calvin proceed to move. Months later, Maggie is pregnant with her and Calvin's most memorable youngster. Bob shows up to choose Calvin up to hang. He gives Calvin back his coat that he allowed him 20 years sooner. The two then, at that point, take off. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to see more content like this.